Okay, good morning, everyone. I don't think any of you can see it, but
صباح
we're facing the
الخير
clock, which is
جميعا.
already ticking down. So I'm going to get started on the interest of time. Thank you so much to everyone here for coming to join today's Doha Forum session on Syria. Fantastic. As someone who's been working on the issue for 13 years now, great to have Syria on the agenda here at the Doha Forum. And of course, great to have you all here. I'm going to give a brief sort of introductory remarks just for a few minutes, and then we're going to hear from all of our excellent panelists who I'll introduce to you all very shortly. In March 2024, just a matter of around 3 months from now, Syria is going to enter its 13th year of crisis. It may very well have dropped off most of your radars these days, but the Syrian crisis is far from over. The battle lines across the country have been frozen for a number of years into 3 or potentially 4 different zones of the country, but battles of various kinds are continuing to this day. Syria is also a geopolitical battleground involving the armies from the United States, Iran, Russia, Turkey, Israel, and others. Terrorism persists in several different areas of the country, and the humanitarian crisis in Syria today is worse than it's ever been, even at the peak of armed conflict. 90% of Syrians today live under the poverty line, 60% are food insecure, and roughly 50% of the population continues to be displaced, either internally or externally as refugees. The World Food Programme has just announced that from January the 1st, it will be ending its food assistance program in all of Syria. And a number of key donor countries for the humanitarian aid effort expect to be cutting their aid budgets for Syria by between 20 to 40% in 2024. So there really is no understating the significance of that particular last point in terms of the humanitarian crisis. Syria is entering a particularly concerning period in that respect. And despite all of these issues appearing to point towards the need for a resolution to the crisis, political progress is all but non-existent. The regional countries here in the Middle East attempted an engagement initiative with the Syrian regime earlier this year in the spring, described variously as a step-for-step process, a conditional engagement. The Syrian regime was awarded a place back on the Arab League, awarded a number of high-profile visits, both to Damascus and from outside of Syria. But as a result of that initiative, every aspect of the Syrian crisis dramatically worsened in this summer. The 8-year United Nations cross-border aid mandate was severed, thanks to a Russian veto. The Syrian pound crashed by at least 80% in a matter of 3 months. From the visit of the Saudi foreign minister to Damascus in April to July, it crashed from 7,500 to $1 to 13,500, a precipitous collapse in the currency. Hostilities spiked in the south of the country, particularly in the northwest, by more than 550%, almost as soon as that re-engagement initiative began. The Captagon trade, a key concern for the region, particularly here in the Gulf, expanded in scale and in scope. We've seen no meaningful refugee returns, another serious concern here in the region, and we've seen a spike of Syrian refugees moving towards Europe by at least 150% compared to 2022. So all of the news in terms of that engagement process has primarily been bad. And as a result, the peace process appears frozen, but I'm looking forward to discussing whether or not that really is the case. The one silver lining to all of this has been a significant progress made in the pursuit of justice and accountability outside Syria. And just in the last couple of months, we've already seen an arrest warrant issued for Assad himself by judges in France. We've seen an International Court for Criminal Justice push in the Netherlands and Canada with regards to the use of torture in Syria, and we've seen a significant push for the establishment of a global chemical weapons tribunal, which is global but focused primarily on the use of chemical weapons in Syria. So, with all that bad news, but also silver linings, we're here to discuss the fate of the political process, where we've been over the past 12 or so years, but also where we could continue to go in the coming months and years. And for that discussion, I couldn't have hoped for a better panel. On my immediate left here, we have Hadi al-Bahra, the president of the Syrian Opposition Coalition. Hadi, thank you for being with us. We have Brigitte Kermy, France's ambassador or special envoy to Syria, and on Syria we have Anne Snow, the United Kingdom special envoy to Syria, and we have Geir Pedersen, the United Nations long-standing special envoy for Syria. So I'm sure we have a lot to discuss today in 41 minutes. So we'll try and keep ourselves as concise as possible. Geir, let me come to you first, if I may. You heard my introductory remarks, which are somewhat negative, but I'd like you, in your position in the United Nations, to be able to try and give us some more silver linings in terms of perhaps lessons learned from what was described as a step-for-step process earlier this year. Maybe where did it go wrong, and what can we do from that to make perhaps some more progress?
Thanks a lot, Charles. And let me start by saying I think I could have made your statement myself. So I could give the floor to Hadi instead, and let's continue the discussion. But seriously speaking, I think this panel is sort of just shows us a little bit what the challenge is. Because if you really are to have a proper discussion about Syria, you need also, all credit to UK and France, but you will need the Americans, you will need the Iranians, you will need the Turks, and the Russians. So the point is, this has been what has been haunting Syria from day number one. That the crisis is not only in Syrian hands, it is also in Syrian hands. And of course, 2254, Security Council 2254, that was adopted way back in 2015, still, in my opinion, has all the elements necessary to find a solution to the conflict. But it would require a new approach to the whole crisis from the government and from the opposition. So why am I saying that? Well, you rightly pointed out that this political process is frozen. There is no other word for that. It's correct. As Hadi knows very well, the Constitutional Committee hasn't met now for 1.5 years. The step-for-step process, I wouldn't say it's frozen, but it is really a part of trying to build confidence. And as we know, Security Council Resolution 2254 is calling for confidence-building measures. So I started working on that, and then, I got support from the Europeans, and then the Americans, and lately from the Arabs. So the Arab Contact Group has said there are 3 elements they want to work on. One, 2254, step-for-step approach, and the Constitutional Committee. And of course, the argument from my Arab friends is basically this, that the Westerners tried to isolate, Syria for 12, 13 years. It didn't work. So let's now see if engagement will work. And of course, their argument would be, give us a little bit of time to see if this will be working. But I think of the joint challenge is this: we don't have much time for precisely the reasons you mentioned. And I may add another one. And that is, of course, the war in Gaza. The war in Gaza already has an impact on the situation in Syria. So we have Iranian support, you all know, Iranian supported group attacking US positions. There have been attacks against occupied Golan, and there have been Israeli attacks, continued attacks against different positions, and the airports in Aleppo and Damascus, and American attacks. So when I met with the Iranian foreign ministers in Geneva, it's already 2 weeks back, I said, we need to stop playing with fire. Of course, they say they agree, they don't want an escalation, but my appeal to everyone, Americans, Iranians, the government, the Israelis, is de-escalate. Let's keep Syria out of this, and let's not allow Syria to be the place where different countries are settling their score against each other. I think that's a major challenge. Then I should just one more thing before you open up. I said we're working on the Constitutional Committee, we're working on step for step. But let me emphasize, no one believes that these two approaches will solve the conflict. We have no illusions about that. We do understand that the other issues need to be addressed. We need to address the question about Turkish withdrawal, American withdrawal, the Kurdish issue, the HDS, the situation in the Northwest, sanctions needs to be addressed, and the question of power sharing, as I call it. If we don't start addressing these issues, we risk that there will be another panel 12 years from now sitting discussing an even greater disaster than what we are facing right now. Let me stop here for now.
Right, thanks, Geir. So you've given us a recommendation for next year's Doha Forum, which I think sounds like a 3-hour panel with about 20 states represented, and then maybe it will be more fruitful. But I think you made some very important points there, and I'd like to build off where you took us to come next to Anne and to Brigitte, in that order. We'll come along the line, and say, can you maybe reflect a bit on what you've heard from Geir there in terms of maybe some of the opportunities to still move forward? And I'll add an extra element to the question, which is, as a result of the, maybe failure is too strong of a word, but the severe shortcomings of the regional initiative this year, there has been contact behind the scenes between regional states and particularly Europeans about how to build on lessons learned from that initiative. So maybe you can offer us a little bit more room for optimism in terms of, broadening out that multilateral conversation about how better an approach could work. But we'll start with you, Anne.
Thank you, Charles. So I don't know whether it's scope for optimism, but I do have a sense of what we now need to do if we do accept that things are stuck, and stuck is the word that we keep using. The first of those is focus. Sometimes we hear that the Syrian conflict is over. For the reasons you set out earlier, it is clearly not. The level of violence, desperately worsening humanitarian need, continued threat from terrorism, spread of Captagon. These are all reasons we need to stay focused on Syria, and it's why I'm really glad that we're here talking about it today. We need to keep talking about the politics, and it's really great you've got the opposition here, both on the stage, but also in the audience. Their work is critical, and we have to continue supporting it. They need to energize and be as dynamic as it is possible to be for the time when there are talks. Civil society. I would add a chair, actually, to Geir's sense of who should be on this stage. Civil society are remarkable and are incredibly professional, dynamic, enthusiastic, passionate. And they want to do things. They want to change things in Syria. They are a part of what will come in the future. Accountability. We have to keep continuing to work on accountability. You referenced a few of the things that have happened in the last just weeks. I'd add to that the OPCW decision, for example. A lot of the work that we do on accountability is slow, it's quiet, it's behind the scenes. We must continue to focus on that, keep putting money into funding the continued gathering of evidence to see where all of this goes. This is what I hear direct from Syrians, and it needs to remain on the forefront of our minds. And humanitarian. You talked about the dire humanitarian circumstances. It is worse than previously, particularly bad in the Northwest, but bad across the country. Speaking as the UK, we have to keep focusing both on mechanisms to get aid in, but also what that approach looks like. As the UK, we're looking at a shift towards what we call early recovery, which is in the space between urgent life-saving assistance and reconstruction. So looking much more at livelihoods, grassroots type support to individual Syrians to try to enable them to build their own livelihoods. And these are the areas I think where we need to keep focusing in the recognition that actually for now the political process appears to be stuck.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne. Brigitte, same questions to you.
Merci. Ça marche? Merci beaucoup, Charles. Je pense que le punchline a été donné dans la session d'avant. Une des choses qu'on a à faire sur la Syrie, c'est de ne de continuer obstinément à chercher une solution, parce que les exemples récents nous ont montré que une crise réputée comme gelée n'est pas vraiment gelée, et que si on ne s'occupe pas d'une partie en conflit, cette partie en conflit va se rappeler à notre souvenir. Donc ça, c'est le punchline que j'aimerais mettre en introduction. La raison de nos multiples échecs sur la Syrie, il y a des multiples raisons, et la première d'entre elles, c'est la nature même du régime syrien, qui
is
fonctionne
the
d'une
nature of the
manière
Syrian regime that is
selon laquelle n'importe quelle
function
concession est la fin de ce
that
régime.
is
Et c'est
functioning.
sur
We
ce
need
point
to look at
précisément
the end
qu'il
of
faut
this
qu'on arrive
regime,
à
and
obtenir un
we
changement
need to have a change
d'attitude,
on this
parce que
point. We
c'est
need a
aussi le
change in
seul
the
moyen
behavior.
que
This is the only
le
way
pays,
or the
la
only
Syrie,
means
survive. Donc,
for
ça, c'est une des
or the
raisons. Je
only
pense
way for
que
Syria to
une autre est
survive.
que nous avons fixé des lignes rouges que nous
We
n'avons
have
pas
set
tenues nous-mêmes.
red lines
Et
which we
l'exemple
did
de
not
2013
adopt,
est très
and
frappant
we
à
can
cet
say
égard,
that the example of
et a entraîné
2013
beaucoup
is
d'autres
really
crises dans la région,
blatant, and
ce
we
qui
have
ont fait
seen
dire aussi que
several and multiple
la question
crises in the
syrienne est
region.
partie
And due to
d'une
that, we can
problématique
say that
géostratégique dans la
the
région
Syrian
qui est beaucoup
crisis
plus large,
started
et qui
from a
fait que
geopolitical
l'ensemble des acteurs
issue,
qui interviennent
and
n'ont
the
pas toujours une politique syrienne
plethora of
seulement.
parties that are intervening
Enfin,
in the
le
Syrian
dernier point
crisis
sur,
is
sur l'échec,
evident.
ou en tout cas
The
pas de résultat à
last
ce stade,
point
je pense que
of the with
nous n'avons
regard
pas
to the
resté
failure
assez, nous ne
is
sommes pas
that
restés assez unis
because we
sur le
were not
dossier syrien,
unified
et
behind
le
the Syrian
régime et ceux
file,
qui ne veulent pas la
and
paix
the
jouent sur
regime
notre
and those
désunion.
who do not
Et
want a
je
peace
prends
are playing
la remarque
on
de Pierre sur le
the
fait qu'il faut qu'on arrive à un moment
uh,
donné à trouver le moyen d'avoir
lack of unity.
tous ceux qui décident à la table.
We
Alors, ça
need
peut
to
pas se
have
faire
all the
forcément dans un
decision
seul
makers
forum,
on
mais il
the
faut que
table or on
chacun, à
board
notre
with us.
manière, on
This
arrive
cannot be
à
done
recréer
within the
un
context
dialogue
of
avec tous
one
les
forum.
acteurs.
We need to
Comment être
launch a dialogue with
plus
all the
efficace sur la
actors.
question syrienne?
So how to be more
Je pense
effective
que
on the
la
Syrian
crise à
question?
Gaza
I think
est
that the crisis
force,
in Gaza
et
is
on doit vraiment
pushing us and
continuer
is
à
forcing
travailler
us to
dessus,
continue on
d'autant
this
plus que,
issue.
comme Guerre l'a très bien
In
indiqué, les
addition
effets
to
sur
that,
la Syrie sont déjà
the war has
très
shown
importants
its
au
repercussion on
nord-est,
Syria,
à la
most
frontière avec le
notably
Golan,
on
et
the borders with the
sans
Golan
compter le fait
region.
que les révoltes continuent à
The
Souaïda.
continuous
On entend parler aussi
revolutions in Suwaida,
de
where
dissatisfaction sur la
we
côte
are
alawite.
hearing
Donc, continuer
about
de
dissatisfaction from the Alawites. All
cette
this
situation, et essayer
is of
tous ensemble,
concern, and
chacun à
we
notre
need
manière, de travailler
to
là-dessus.
try to work on all these issues
En ce qui concerne le
all
dialogue avec les
together.
régionaux,
With regard
effectivement,
to the dialogue with the
la
local
décision
people,
des pays arabes de
the
réintégrer
decision
la
of the
Syrie
Arab people of
dans la Ligue
reintegrating or
arabe est une
including
décision
Syria in
souveraine
the League
qui
of
leur
Arab
appartient,
States is a
mais
sovereign decision.
c'est une opportunité pour nous
However,
pour
this
essayer
is
de
an
voir
opportunity
ce
for
que
us
chacun
in
d'entre
order
nous
to see what
pouvons
every
faire
one of us
pour que
can do.
chacun avec ses outils, nous essayons de faire
So
entendre raison au régime syrien.
we
Euh,
can
donc, je
direct
pense
the
que
Syrian regime in
si
the
nous développons ce
in
dialogue
the right path.
de manière
We
à ce
need
que
to
chacun
develop this
puisse
dialogue
établir ses priorités,
so
et
each and
elles
everyone
comptent toutes
can
dans la
set his own
2254,
priorities,
mais la
and
2254 doit sans
the
doute être
resolution 2254
revisitée pour être adaptée à la situation de
must be
2024.
re-examined
Mais
and
nous
must be
avons
adapted
nos
to the
outils qui
2024
sont
situation. However, the
les
instruments
sanctions,
we have between
la
our hands are
non-normalisation sans
the
condition
sanctions and
et la
the
non-reconstruction de ce que le régime et
conditional
ses alliés ont
renormalization.
les Arabes aujourd'hui ont un canal de
Arabs
discussion.
have
Je pense que
channels
nous
of
pouvons
discussion
trouver
today,
un
and
terrain
thus
d'entente,
I can
chacun
see
avec les
that we
leviers
can find a common
dont ils
ground
disposent.
with
Et enfin,
the means
je
we
pense que la
have
question
between our
principale,
hands. I
c'est
think
de ne
that
pas
the
oublier la
major question
population
is
syrienne,
not to forget
parce
the
que
Syrian
trop de
population,
discussions sur la
because
Syrie
lots of
se
discussion
tiennent
on
sans les
Syria
Syriens,
are taking
et
place
nous devons
without the
absolument
Syrians themselves.
réintroduire
And
les
we
Syriens dans
need
le jeu,
to
qu'il s'agisse
re-include the
de
Syrians in
l'opposition, bien
this
sûr,
game,
et
be it the
malheureusement,
opposition
il faut qu'on arrive à
or
faire du
any other
progrès
party.
pour
We
rétablir
need to progress
la
in
seule enceinte
order
où se trouvait
to
l'opposition et le
have the
régime. Je parle
opposition and the
du
regime on
comité
board. And here
constitutionnel,
I'm
mais
talking
nous pouvons
about
agir
the
à plein d'autres niveaux.
constitutional
Et
committee.
comme Anne, je suis souvent fascinée,
And
et c'est la chose qui
likewise,
nous donne de l'espoir
Anne,
au quotidien,
this is what is
par
giving us
l'énergie, le
some
professionnalisme
promising
des Syriens
hopes.
qui se trouvent en Syrie, dans les pays hôtes
We
et
can
dans nos
see the capacities of
il y a là
Syrians,
toute la relève pour
whether
demain,
they are
et
inside or outside
nous
Syria.
devons continuer
We
à
need
nous
to
tenir
rely on
à
their
leur côté,
potential, and we need
et bien
to
sûr
support them.
continuer à fournir l'aide humanitaire
And we need
massive
as well
qui,
to
si elle n'existait
provide
pas,
the humanitarian
ferait que la
assistance,
Syrie
the
serait
massive
dans
humanitarian
une situation
assistance
aujourd'hui beaucoup
that
plus catastrophique.
without which the situation would be really disastrous.
Lee, I hope you got your headset working. No? Okay. Because Hadi, I'm coming to you next. I'm really glad, Brigitte, that you brought up the vital importance of having Syrians at the center of these processes. Of course, it's something that Ger made clear in his remarks too. And I'm glad you made it because it was part of the question I was going to come to Hadi with first, which is, I think, Hadi, I'm sure you'll agree that most of the initiatives we've seen take place this year did not have Syrians involved, and certainly not at the core. However, in the past, of course, we've had the Geneva type processes, which did, but didn't go where we wanted them to. So I suppose my ultimate question to you, given your leadership position within the opposition, is what are we missing? What have we missed in the past from a Geneva type process, which has had Syrians at the core and at the center? And what did we miss earlier this year in terms of bringing together regional states to push for something? But as I made clear in my opening remarks, everything only got worse.
I think what we are missing is really addressing the core obstacle of the peace process. We are talking about the process which started in 2014. And since then, up until now, you have only one main obstacle, which is the absence of any willingness to engage in good faith by the Assad regime in these talks. So unless you find a solution on how either to get them engaged positively, engage for progress, engage not to obstruct as they do, you will be running, we will be sitting here maybe after 5 years talking about Syria. Every type of solution has been tried in Syria since 2011 by the Arab Initiative, first initiative, Arab second initiative, 6-point plans of the late Kofi Annan. Everything failed because of their obstruction strategy, which they engage with in these talks. The lack of clear language in all UN resolutions, starting from Geneva communique, when it says that it's played out a clear plan to achieve peace in Syria. It's the most comprehensive project, a roadmap to peace, but it had in it implanted really mines which will explode, which is the mutual consent. So the regime has always veto power to block and obstruct the peace process. The opposition has put complete road peace plan on the table in 2014, and it was very reasonable. The regime refused even to discuss it, or they said on the table, we refuse to hear it. The international community tried to hand half victory to the regime when they stopped all the aids to the Free Syrian Army. It didn't get you nowhere. They tried reconciliation. They have local settlement. You have Dar'a now, setting as an example how if you go on that pathway that you will achieve nothing. So unless we find a way to press on the Assad regime to be engaged in positive way, always you will hit the same obstacle. Even until now, we have the step for step. There is no statement from the regime, nothing to prove that the regime did engage or did accept step for step. We have the Constitution Committee meeting. Until now, the regime really obstruct its progress. Everybody say it's a Syrian process, while in reality, it's not a Syrian process. We have regional countries involved, we have international countries involved, and you cannot solve the Syrian crisis unless you achieve two things. You need a real sustainable engagement, positive engagement by all regional and international players. If they don't engage positively in the objective of achieving the peace process, achieving a successful process, you will not move forward. The second fact, no settlement can provide a sustainable settlement for Syria if you overlook the Syrian people grievances. Dar'a example, they overlooked all the Syrian people grievances. You see, there is no sustainable peace, no sustainable security in Dar'a region. And the latest ship, which drowned in near Greece, third of these guys, the victims, they were from Dar'a region. Syrians are losing hope. What I'm saying that the Syrian crisis itself created its own dynamics, which you cannot ignore, and it will take the international community by a surprise. What they tried to claim that they wanted to avoid at the start, it will happen by itself now. We are moving from humanitarian crisis to humanitarian catastrophe. 42% as we sit today of the Syrian people below hunger level. They don't have enough food to eat on their table. In 2024, with these reduction in humanitarian aid, we are going towards famine. And if we go towards famine, what you will see in Syria, you will see the complete collapse of a state institution, and the regime would stand, but would not stand organized. They will become gangs and militias. Total, total chaos will be in Syria, and at that time, we will not be able to move forward. It would be so bad that you cannot really organize even any process of any type. So if we don't call for a regional and international conference for main players to engage in good faith in pushing and pressing the Assad regime to be engaged in this process, we are wasting our time. We are just running around the problem and not agreeing to identify the core issue and the core obstacle of this.
Thank you so much, Hadi. I think you made a lot of very, very important points, which add to the coming question I will have for Ger. This is going to have to be a quick fire round. I'm going to aim to keep about 10 minutes for Q&A with the audience. So Ger, we heard, I think all across the board in different ways that the various initiatives and processes that have been done have involved many of the right ingredients, but the key obstacle is convincing the regime to engage in good faith. Given your particular role and your ability to engage with all of the various external actors, my question to you is hopefully relatively simple, but maybe difficult at the same time, which is you mentioned the word confidence building measures. Given all of your consultations with all of the various stakeholders, what kind of confidence building measures do you think could be initiated that would either allow or convince the regime to act in good faith in a kind of step-for-step initiative? Are there certain wins that could be achieved if there was, as Hadi was describing, much more of a collective approach to this crisis?
Listen, there are no several ideas on the table that have been discussed also with the government in Damascus. It's let me give sort of what I would call the headlines for that. It's related to that the government would do things what I would call related to protection issues. For instance, the file of missing and detained. And then that it would be possible to address issues that actually goes to the core of the rather dire future that how they described the danger of collapse in Syria, that you start addressing livelihood issues. But this, in my opinion, will only be possible if all the sides agree on the steps beforehand. So in other words, if Damascus say A, the key donors say B, and it is agreed when they start implementing it. And then it needs to be verifiable. This is sort of a tested thing, but of course, within the Syrian context, with all the suspicions that are still there, it's difficult to get off the ground. And here the challenge is also, of course, with Gaza. Not only, I mentioned at the very beginning, that it is already a spillover when it comes to the military security situation, but frankly speaking, there is also a spillover when it comes to the political process. The oxygen has more or less left the room. And that's, of course, why I should have started by praising you and the organizers of this event, that there is actually a focus on Syria. Because I can tell you, when I show up different places now, not only in the Arab world, but also here, people are a little bit surprised. Syria is still around. and we need to remind that, if we don't start do things, we could risk that things go terribly wrong in Syria. And that, as I said, de-escalation, containment, but then slowly start to work on the issues related to step for step. But then also in my dialogue with the key actors, I will also address the other issues that I mentioned.
Thank you very much, Ger. Anne, let me come to you with a question on the aid issue. So, and it's in perhaps indirect relation to the issue of confidence building measures and step for step. And I described in my opening remarks the severing of the cross-border mandate as, very much a negative repercussion, directly or indirectly, of the regional initiative. The timing was hard to ignore. The regime argues however, that it has allowed aid to continue to cross into northwestern Syria, and that its allowing of that should be seen as some kind of a concession. So my question to you is it, from the United Kingdom's perspective, has aid continued to cross into northwestern Syria in the way that we want it to? And if it has, does that give us any kind of hope in terms of winning concessions from the regime, or am I being overly optimistic?
Perhaps a little optimistic. It is positive that aid is continuing to move. No doubt at all. We were very, very concerned. The issue here is that we remain concerned because that consent could be removed at any moment. What we want to see and what Syrians in humanitarian need desperately need is predictable delivery of aid. What we also have lost without the renewal of the mandate is the process for reporting and accountability, and that is incredibly important. I'd also like to pick up here on that point about Syrians being involved in processes, which a few of us have talked about. That is also something I hear very strongly from Syrians. They want to be part of those decisions and those conversations and delivery, which is why we're quite proud, for example, the AFNS works directly with Syrian organizations, and a very significant proportion of aid moving through AFNS is through Syrian organizations.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anne. And thanks for being so concise. Brigitte, I want to ask you a question on civil society, which has come up a few times. The Madania initiative gathered in Paris around a year ago. I've lost track now, time blends. But a serious initiative to put civil society together as a kind of cohesive voice, and to use that to leverage and encourage more political progress. Where do you stand on that? What is the French government doing to continue to support initiatives like that going forward?
Madania s'est réunie à Paris en
Madania
juin
met in
dernier, donc ça
Paris
fait
in June
beaucoup moins d'un an.
last year,
Et
less than a
c'est
year
une
ago.
initiative purement
It's an
syrienne.
initiative which is
Nous
purely
avons
Syrian.
aidé pour la délivrance de
We've
visas,
helped
ce qui n'est
in
pas toujours une
the
chose
granting of the
facile
visa, and this is
quand on
not
est syrien.
always an easy matter
Et
when
toute
you're a Syrian
l'organisation, la
citizen. We've
conception,
also
le
worked on the
financement
organization,
est purement
design,
syrien.
and the
Et je
funding,
pense
which is
que
all
c'est une
purely
initiative parmi
Syrian.
d'autres,
I believe that this is an
mais
initiative among
elle
others.
souligne la
However, this
vitalité et les
initiative
ressources
shows
qui sont
the
disponibles,
strengths, the
qu'elles
vitality,
soient
and the
politiques
resources which are available,
avec la
be them
représentation de l'opposition,
political
qu'elles
with the
soient
representation of the opposition, or
politico-socialo-économiques
political,
comme la
social,
plateforme de
economic,
Madania.
like Madania
L'important, c'est
platform.
d'être aux
No
côtés
matter what
des
this
forces
is, what
vives
matters is that we stand next
syriennes,
to the
parce qu'une des
Syrian
raisons pour
living
laquelle
forces, because one of the reasons
ce régime est
for
si
which
obstiné à
the
supprimer
regime is
les voix
so
syriennes,
intent
c'est que
in
toute cette énergie et toutes ces
suppressing the
initiatives
Syrian voices
représentent
is
une
because
autre
all of
manière
these
d'être syrien
initiatives
aujourd'hui.
represent a different form of being
Je pense que
Syrian
les
today.
Syriens
I believe
à
that
l'intérieur de la Syrie
in
et dans les
Syria
pays hôtes
and
et en
in
diaspora
host
aujourd'hui
countries and in the
sont différents des
diaspora,
Syriens de 2011.
Syrians are different
Ils
from the
ont
Syrians of
pu
2011.
s'organiser,
Those
avoir
Syrians were able
des
to
milliers
organize
d'initiatives
themselves.
dans
They
tous
were
les
able
domaines
to launch thousands
qui
of
font de
initiatives
réels
in all
professionnels
domains, and this
et de
makes them
réels
real professionals, people
un réservoir de
who
citoyenneté
are a real
qui sera la Syrie de demain. Si on prend
source
l'exemple, par exemple,
for the
de ce qui
citizenship
s'est
of
passé après
Syria
le tremblement de
tomorrow,
terre en
if we take
février
into
et de
consideration
la
what happened after
rapidité
the earthquake in
avec laquelle les
February
casques
and the
blancs ont pu
speed
réagir
with
sur le terrain, je pense que c'est
which
là un exemple très
everyone
concret
acted on
de ce que
the
peut faire
ground.
la
This
société
is a real
civile et
example of
que
what
nous tenons à
the Syrian
accompagner
civil
de
society
manière
can do,
différenciée
and
selon
we
qu'il
want to
s'agisse de différentes
accompany
parties
this
de la Syrie, en espérant qu'un
in a
jour ça sera au
diversified
niveau de
way.
toute la
We
Syrie.
do hope
Mais
that
voilà, ce que je veux
this
dire par là,
will
c'est que
reflect on the
c'est une
whole
manière de
Syrian
préparer l'avenir
territory in the future.
et
This is a way to
de ne pas
pave the way for the
abandonner
future
la Syrie,
and
de continuer à
to not
montrer que
abandon Syria.
ce
This
n'est
is
pas
a
un
way
problème de
to
ressources, ce n'est
show
pas un
that it's
problème
not a problem
d'alternative
of
comme on a
resources,
pu
it's not
l'entendre dans
a
le
problem
passé.
of alternatives
L'alternative
like we used to hear in
existe,
the past.
elle
The
peut cohabiter,
alternative is here.
mais il faut
It
qu'il y ait
can
des
coexist.
concessions
However, it's
fortes
important
pour qu'elle
to
puisse
win
exister.
important concessions for it to be alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. Hadi, just very quickly to you before we turn to the audience. Let me ask you, given again your role as president of the opposition, what we heard just now about civil society and how important it is. We've already heard others already speak about the importance of protests in Sweden, clear public discontent within the Alawi community. What is the Etilaf doing to engage with these various developments, various realities, to broaden the scope of what the opposition can represent, but thereby strengthen the opposition's ability to enforce itself within a process?
We are mainly concentrating on inclusivity. We are really giving everybody, every part of the society, their role, what they can contribute in order to ease the life of Syrians and also create a solidarity in the political position. So we have like Madania group, for example, we engage them widely with the negotiation process, with the regular meeting to put them in view of all obstacles we are facing, and also most importantly, on how to prevent the famine or really reduce the effect, if it will happen, inside Syria. How to rebuild the north of Syria, how we can increase their capability to be productive instead of they're in need of the food basket. And we are doing big programs in that direction, but really it needs the assistance and help of the international community. If we don't do that fast and coordinated, organized matter, the lack of assistance this year, it was 67%. Next year, first quarter of 2024, it will reach 80%. So we are really facing a big challenge on how to strengthen the people in north of Syria, how really to get them back to work and not to be dependent on the humanitarian assistance fully.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, so we can briefly turn to the audience maybe for a couple questions. We'll take two at once and take them to the panel. So if people can raise their hands. I assume there's maybe a microphone to hand around. We'll take that gentleman in the middle and the other gentleman at the back.
Hi, I'm Daniel Gala from Berlin, director of the Candid Foundation. I'm working on track 2 in Syria. I wonder, like some of the European countries normalize or have the idea that they should normalize with the Syrian regime, establish diplomatic ties. Others don't. In the Arab world is also divided. There is a majority of countries that have entertained diplomatic relations, others don't. Wouldn't it be a good idea for Europeans and Arabs to come to terms and just like define what they want to achieve in Syria, regardless of the nature, which is, after all, a technical problem of their nature of their relations with the Syrian regime? And if yes, what could those joint criteria be that Arabs and Europeans could discuss together, the common baseline and probably the common criteria in their effort to at least alleviate the plight of the Syrian people inside Syria, but also, of course, in the Syrian diaspora? It's a question directed to the entire panel, which probably doesn't make it easy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I think the gentleman on the other side also had his hand up.
Thank you. Sami Franji, originally from Lebanon, but living in Qatar. The question to the panel is about the issue of refugees. We see that more and more refugees are being securitized and being used as a form of a pressure or a weapon in the war itself. We see the Syrian refugees have been in Lebanon for the past 10 years or 11 years, almost constituting 30% of the population. We see that in Turkey, the war in Gaza, it started as pushing people from Gaza to Egypt, in Sudan, to South Sudan, to Chad, to Ethiopia, to Egypt. So everywhere we see there are wars and conflicts, there is a question of refugees. How does prominent panelists from the international community, including the UN, can see a durable solution for the return of refugees to their countries?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so you've got each of you a minute, roughly, to take what you want from those two questions and provide it to the audience. So we'll start in the order we started with Ger, and we'll move along the line.
I'll leave the European question to the Europeans. So looking forward to hear your answer to that. On the refugee question, that's of course a key issue. And it's of course a disaster that's been going on for way too long. But I think there's only one way out of that, and that is that the refugees need to feel that it is safe to return and that they have livelihoods when they return. And we know from all the different surveys that UNHCR has been undertaking the last few years that the refugees do not feel that it is safe, and they do not feel that there are livelihoods for them if they were to return. So both these two issues must, of course, be addressed if we were to see any significant return to Syria. And as of today, it's clear that the refugees have spoken and said they don't feel that the situation is ripe for return.
Perfect. Thank you, Ger. Anne?
I think perhaps the tragedy of the situation is that there is a unity of what the various partners would like to see. And at the most simple terms, that's an end to the conflict, which would then facilitate the return of refugees. If you're looking across both European partners, but also in this region, there's great unity of purpose, an end to the flows of captagon, a return of the refugees. As I understand it, there is still agreement amongst the European states on the 3 no's, for example. So I don't think that is the issue. I think the issue is the geopolitics, which is incredibly hard to budge.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Brigitte?
La question de l'engagement n'est pas une question technique.
Question of a
C'est une
commitment
question
is not a
qui requiert
technical
de la confiance.
question. It's a
Et je
question
pense
which
que
requires a trust.
la confiance
And I
est
believe that
ce qui manque le
trust
plus
is what is
sur la question
lacking
syrienne.
most when we talk about
La question qu'il
the
faut se
Syrian
poser, c'est
issue.
qu'est-ce
The
que
question that we need
l'engagement
to ask
peut
ourselves
apporter
is
de
the following.
plus
What can
et
the commitment
qu'est-ce qu'il peut
bring,
changer à la
and what
situation syrienne.
can it do
Or,
to
les
change the
exemples
situation
récents
in Syria? Recent
nous prouvent que
examples
c'est
have
plutôt
proven and shown
contre-productif.
that it's
Donc,
counterproductive.
ce qu'il faut trouver le
What
moyen de faire,
we
c'est
need to do is
d'avoir un outil assez puissant
to have
pour obtenir
a
des
strong
mesures de confiance.
tool in
Et je
order
pense que c'est
to
une
build
des choses qu'on doit
trust.
discuter
And this is
justement
one of the
entre
issues that
tous
we need
les
to
acteurs de la crise syrienne, et c'est
discuss
ce qu'on
with
essaye de
the
faire
actors of
en
the
ayant
Syrian crisis.
initié
This is what
un
we are
dialogue
trying
informel
to do.
avec nos
We've
partenaires
launched an
arabes,
informal
mais
dialogue
aussi
with our
avec
Arab
les
partners
partenaires turcs et
and
d'autres
with the Turkish
pays impliqués
partners
dans la crise
and the
syrienne.
other
Donc,
countries which are involved in
repolitiser la
the
question parce qu'elle
Syrian
est
crisis.
éminemment
We need
politique, c'est pas une question technique.
understand and bear in
Et
mind
ensuite,
that this
trouver les
question
moyens,
is a
chacun avec nos
political one and
outils,
it's not a technical one. And
d'augmenter la
then
pression
with our
pour
tools, we
obtenir
need
des
to
résultats. Et
increase
ça
the
m'amène à la
pressure
question
to
des
get
réfugiés. La
results.
question
And
des
this brings
réfugiés,
me
tout le monde
to the
sait
issue
qu'est-ce
of the
que
refugees. We all
les
know
réfugiés attendent pour
what
pouvoir
refugees are waiting
réentrer en
for in
Syrie.
order
Il faut
to
de la
go back to
sécurité, de
Syria.
la
They
dignité
need security, they
et
need dignity,
recouvrer ces
and
droits
they
d'une manière
need
volontaire.
to recover
Le HCR a
their
fait un
rights.
énorme travail qu'il a transmis à Damas
UNHCR made great work, which
sur
it
des demandes de
transmitted
base
to
dans 10
Damascus
questions.
about
Damas a récemment
basic
répondu, mais
claims.
en
Damascus
n'apportant aucune
answered lately, but
chose
Damascus
nouvelle
did not
de
bring
mesures qui
anything
permettrait
new
aux
to the table,
réfugiés
and no measures
d'être
which
sûrs,
would
par
allow
exemple, de ne pas
refugees to be
être mis en prison à
sure
leur
or certain, for
retour,
example, that they will not be put in jail when
de
they come back
recouvrer
to
leurs droits
Syria,
en matière de
or
logement,
that they
d'être
would recover
libres
their
d'aller dans
rights
la
as
région
to housing, or that they
qui est
can
leur région
go freely
d'origine ou autre. Tout ça,
to
ça se résume
their
en un
area
seul
of
mot, c'est
origin. I can
le
summarize
droit
this in one
international, en fait. Et c'est la
expression.
base de la
It's
question
international
syrienne.
law, and it's at
Pour
the
ça,
core
il
of
faut qu'on
the
continue
Syrian
les
issue.
efforts.
To this
Et
end, we
nous
need to
comprenons très bien le
continue
poids
our
que
efforts. We
représentent
do
les réfugiés
understand
pour
the
les pays
weight
hôtes.
that,
Et en
or
travaillant
the
sur ces
burden that
questions, c'est
refugees
aussi
represent
une manière
to host countries.
de
And when we
faire
work
deux
on this
choses.
issue,
Un,
it's
de
a way
contrer
for
le
us to do
narratif
two
du
things. First,
régime
to
qui dit
counter
que
the
c'est la
narrative of
communauté
the regime,
internationale
which
qui
says that
empêche les
it's
réfugiés
international
de
community
rentrer
which prevents
parce que la
refugees
communauté
from
internationale ne
going
donne
back
pas les fonds
because the international
suffisants
community is not
pour
dedicating the
reconstruire
necessary
les lieux
funds
où se
to
trouveront les réfugiés. Il
rebuild
faut renverser
the
la charge de la
places of
preuve et
origin of the
essayer
refugees. We
que
need to
les choses soient
invert the
séquencées
burden of
d'une manière
proof,
qui
and we need
permette
to
ce retour.
sequence
Et
things
le
in a
deuxième
way that
message, c'est
will
aussi aux
allow
pays hôtes
for this return.
pour leur dire,
The
nous
second
comprenons
thing, it's a way for us to
la question
tell
des
host
réfugiés.
countries
Encore une
that
fois,
we
nous
understand the
n'abandonnons pas
weight
cette
of
question
the
parce qu'il en va
refugees
de l'avenir des Syriens,
question. We
premièrement, de la Syrie,
want
deuxièmement,
to work
et
on this issue. It's important
de la
for the refugees. It's
frustration
important
de ces
for
situations
Syria and for the
intenables, enfin.
Syrians. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Brigitte. And then Hadi, finally, do you have anything to add?
It amazes me when we talk about refugees return to Syria, while the question should be why more and more people seek refuge outside of Syria on daily basis. On daily basis, you are talking about thousands of Syrians still seeking refuge outside of Syria. So how we can talk about refugee return if we cannot stop the reasons which push these people to seek refuge outside of Syria? We have to say that really to have a meaningful process in Syria, it needs really patience, flexibility. It needs full and continuous long-term engagement by the international community. And you cannot and you will not have sustainable peace and security in Syria without really achieving a political resolution which addresses the grievances of the Syrian people and achieve their aspirations. Without it, you will not achieve any sustainable solution for Syria. Thank you.
Hadi, thank you so much for ending that. I think that was the key point to end on. Time is up, as we're being told on the screen here. So I want to first thank the Doha Forum for hosting a Syria panel. I'm thrilled that we could do it, keep the discussion going, and hopefully move it forward. And of course, Ger and Brigitte and Hadi, thank you so much for taking the time to be here and for all of your remarks. And of course, to you all, thank you for being here. I hope you can take something away from the conversation. Thank you.